I'm Samantha Mitchell, 34 years old, standing outside my father's retirement gala in full military dress. The security guard scanned the list again. Sorry, ma'am, your name isn't here. Humiliation burned through me as fellow officers walked past. 20 years of service, countless medals, and I couldn't attend my own father's celebration. Then Commander Wallace appeared. Is there a problem?
He spotted me.
His eyes widened. Welcome, General Mitchell. Your father must be proud. If you've ever felt that sting when your own family doesn't see your worth, this story might resonate with you. Before I take you through how my family's betrayal led to the most bittersweet victory of my career, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this family drama already feels familiar, hit that like button. Trust me, the moment when karma finally caught up with my father is something you won't want to miss. The Mitchell name carried weight in military circles. My grandfather served in Vietnam, my father in Desert Storm, and my uncles scattered across various branches of service. Military blood ran through our veins, or so my father Richard would proudly declare at every family gathering. What he really meant was that military blood ran through the veins of Mitchell men. Mitchell men serve, Mitchell women support. This wasn't just a saying in our household. It was practically carved into the dining room table where my father would hold court, regaling us with tales of battlefield heroism while my mother Eleanor nodded appreciatively, the perfect picture of a supportive military wife. I grew up watching my father's eyes light up whenever he spoke about the legacy he would pass down. Those same eyes would drift past me to land on my younger brother Kyle, born 4 years after me. He'll make a fine officer someday, Dad would say, with Kyle barely out of diapers. I would sit there, invisible, despite being the one who memorized military aircraft models and studied battle strategies for fun. When I was 16, I announced at dinner that I was joining ROTC in high school. That's cute, Sam, my father chuckled, cutting into his steak. But don't you think the debate club would be more suitable? Or perhaps cheerleading? I'm serious, Dad. I want to serve. The laughter died in his throat. The military isn't for girls, especially not Mitchell girls. Times have changed, Dad. Women serve in combat roles now. Not my daughter, he said firmly, his fork clattering against the plate. Mitchell men serve. Mitchell women support. That's how it's always been. My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. Honey, your father knows best about these things. Why don't you consider nursing? You could still help soldiers that way. I enrolled in ROTC anyway. My father didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. When he finally acknowledged my existence again, it was to inform me that I was making a mockery of our family tradition. Despite his disapproval, I excelled in the program. My commanding officers noticed my aptitude and suggested I apply to the military academy. I completed my application with meticulous care, secured recommendations, and passed the physical requirements with flying colors. When the rejection letter came, I was devastated. It's for the best, sweetie, my mother said a little too quickly. Military life is so hard on women. It wasn't until 3 years later that I discovered the truth. While home on break from the state university I'd settled for, I overheard a conversation between my parents. She's still talking about transferring to that officer training program, my mother whispered. I thought we were past this when you called your friend at the academy. Don't worry, my father replied. I made it clear that the Mitchell family would be very disappointed if Samantha's application received favorable consideration. No one's going to cross me on this. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My own parents had sabotaged my future. The future I had worked so hard for, the calling I felt in my bones. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I contacted my grandfather, the only person who had ever shown genuine interest in my military aspirations. They did what? He growled over the phone, his voice still commanding despite his 80 years. They made sure I wouldn't be accepted, I repeated, fighting back tears. There was a long silence. Come see me tomorrow, Sammy. We'll fix this. My grandfather, General Joseph Mitchell, might have been retired, but his influence remained intact. With his guidance, I reapplied to a different program, using his address for correspondence. When the acceptance letter came, he presented it to me with pride in his eyes. "You're Mitchell. Military excellence is in your blood, regardless of whether you're a woman or a man." I enrolled without telling my parents where I was going. When they finally discovered I had been accepted into an officer training program, my father erupted. "You went behind my back? After everything I've done for this family? After you went behind mine?" I countered. "I know what you did, Dad. I know you sabotaged my first application." His face flushed red, not with shame but with anger. "I was protecting you and our family name."
No.
"You were protecting your ego." From that day forward, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not only succeed in the military, I would excel. Every achievement, every commendation, every promotion would be a small piece of revenge against the father who tried to clip my wings before I could even fly. I began sending copies of my achievements to my father without comment. My first commendation letter. A photograph of me receiving an award for marksmanship. A newspaper clipping mentioning my name for coordinating a flawless training exercise. I never included notes, never asked for congratulations. Each envelope was its own quiet statement. "Look what I've accomplished without your support." He never responded to any of them, but I knew he received them. My mother would occasionally call, her voice tight with what I recognized as conflicted loyalty, to mention casually that "your father saw your recent thing. He hopes you're being careful." Being careful. As if excellence was something to be cautious about. As if achievement was a phase I would outgrow. My grandfather remained my steadfast supporter until his passing when I was 25. At his funeral, I stood tall in my uniform, already holding a rank that had taken my father 10 years longer to achieve. My father barely acknowledged me, even as fellow officers came to offer their condolences and their admiration for being Joseph Mitchell's granddaughter, clearly cut from the same cloth. "He was so proud of you," one elderly commander told me, clasping my hand. "Said you reminded him of himself. Same determination." I glanced at my father, who had conveniently found something fascinating to look at on the other side of the room. Later, when we gathered at my grandparents' house, I discovered that my grandfather had left me his medals, his service pistol, and a letter that simply said, "Continue to aim high, Sammy." Some people look up at the stars and declare them out of reach. Others build rockets. I built my rocket, piece by piece, promotion by promotion, commendation by commendation. Each achievement was another stage in my ascent, fueled partly by passion for service, but also by the determination to prove my father wrong. My career trajectory could be described with one word: meteoric. By 28, I had surpassed the rank my father held at 35. My superiors frequently commented on my strategic thinking, leadership capabilities, and unwavering commitment. What they didn't know was that every achievement was shadowed by the growing rift between me and my family. After 3 successful deployments, I returned home with a newly minted promotion to major. The same week, my brother Kyle received his promotion to captain. My parents threw him a lavish celebration at their home, inviting extended family and my father's military colleagues. "Will you be attending Kyle's promotion party?" My mother asked during one of our increasingly infrequent phone calls. "I didn't realize I was invited," I replied. "Of course you're invited, Samantha. Your family." Her voice carried that familiar note of strained patience, as if I was being deliberately difficult. I decided to attend, partly out of curiosity, partly to support Kyle, who had always been caught in the middle of my conflict with our father. When I arrived, in uniform with my major insignia clearly visible, my mother greeted me with a quick hug. "You look nice, dear. Everyone's in the backyard." The everyone included at least 50 people, many of whom I recognized as my father's friends and colleagues. As I made my way through the crowd, I received nods of acknowledgement, a few surprised looks at my rank, and several enthusiastic handshakes from officers who knew me by reputation. "Major Mitchell," said Colonel Henderson, one of my father's oldest friends. "Your reputation precedes you. That operation in Kandahar was textbook perfect." "Thank you, sir." Just doing my job. Doing it exceptionally well, from what I hear. Your father must be bursting with pride. Before I could respond, my father appeared, clapping a hand on Henderson's shoulder. Jem, I see you've met my daughter. Indeed I have, Richard. You never told me she was such a rising star. My father's smile tightened. Well, Kyle's the man of the hour today. Have you congratulated him yet? Throughout the party, this pattern repeated itself. Any mention of my achievements was quickly redirected to Kyle's promotion. When toasts were made, my father raised his glass to Captain Mitchell, continuing our proud family tradition of military excellence. Not Captains Mitchell, though both his children held that rank or higher. Just Captain Mitchell.
Kyle.
Kyle himself seemed uncomfortable with the spotlight. Later, when we found ourselves alone by the food table, he spoke quietly. I'm sorry about Dad. You know how he is. It's not your fault, Kyle.
Still.
Your last deployment, that was impressive stuff, Sam. People at the Pentagon talk about you. I smiled at my brother. Despite everything, Kyle and I had maintained a relationship, albeit one carefully navigated around our father's favoritism. Thanks. And congratulations on your promotion. You earned it. Did I? He asked, looking into his drink. Sometimes I wonder if I'd even be in the military if it wasn't for Dad. Before I could respond, our mother swept over. Kyle, honey, your father wants to introduce you to General Westmore. He's flown in specially to meet you. As Kyle was led away, I stood alone, watching my family perform their well-rehearsed roles in the play my father had been directing since before I was born. My mother, the supportive wife. My brother, the reluctant heir. And me, the inconvenient daughter who refused to accept her assigned part. While my family relationships deteriorated, I was building something else, a network of loyal colleagues and friends within the military who valued me for my abilities, not my gender or family name. Chief among these was Diana Reynolds, a lieutenant colonel who had become both mentor and friend. Your father's an old-school idiot, Diana told me bluntly after I confided in her about the promotion party. But don't let his narrow-mindedness limit your vision. Some of us have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. So we work twice as hard, and eventually, they can't ignore us anymore. I took her advice to heart. I volunteered for challenging assignments, pursued additional qualifications, and strategically positioned myself for advancement. Each step was calculated, not just to succeed, but to excel so definitively that not even my father could dismiss my achievements. Holiday gatherings became exercises in restraint. Thanksgiving dinners featured carefully neutral conversations about weather and sports, avoiding any mention of my latest commendation or Kyle's recent struggles with a difficult commanding officer. Pass the gravy, please, my mother would say with forced brightness whenever silence threatened to allow substantive discussion. Christmas exchanges became increasingly impersonal. Gift cards from my parents, generic military-themed items that suggested they knew I served but paid little attention to what I actually did or liked. In return, I gave them equally impersonal presents, selected by my assistant without much input from me. The distance grew. I called less frequently. Visits became annual, then biennial events. I missed my brother's wedding due to deployment, genuinely this time, though part of me was relieved to have a valid excuse. When my mother had surgery, I sent flowers and called daily but didn't take leave to be there in person. The bonds of family had been stretched so thin that they had become nearly invisible threads, maintained more out of obligation than affection. By 33, I had achieved the rank of colonel, commanded my own unit, and earned decorations that my father had only dreamed of. Military journals occasionally mention me as an example of the new generation of leadership. Twice, I was invited to speak at my father's former base, and twice I found reasons to decline, unwilling to step directly into his territory. Then came the news that my father, after 35 years of service, was retiring. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon, catching me between meetings. Your father's retirement ceremony is next month, she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of careful neutrality. It's going to be quite the event. The base commander is hosting it at the officers' club. That's nice, I replied, equally neutral. Dad must be pleased.
He is.
Very pleased. A pause. It would mean a lot if you could attend. I hesitated. Despite everything, some small part of me still sought his approval, still hoped for reconciliation. I'll check my schedule. Do that, dear. And let me know soon. They're finalizing the guest list. I hung up with a familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always formed when dealing with my family. Diana found me staring out the window of my office 10 minutes later. Bad news, she asked. My father's retiring. Big ceremony next month. She sat on the edge of my desk. Going to go? Should I? Do you want to? I considered the question honestly. I don't know. Part of me thinks it's time to try again. Another part knows exactly how it will go. He'll give a speech about the Mitchell military legacy, without mentioning me. I'll sit there feeling like an imposter in my own family. Diana nodded thoughtfully. Well, while you're deciding, you might want to look at this. She placed a folder on my desk. The promotion board results were released early to commanding officers.
Congratulations, some.
They're recommending you for Brigadier General. I stared at the folder, then at Diana. General? Youngest female general in the last 20 years. She grinned. Your father never made it past colonel, did he? He hadn't. Despite his ambitions, Richard Mitchell had topped out at colonel, a respectable rank, but not the general's star he had coveted. And now I, the daughter he had tried to keep out of the military altogether, was about to surpass him. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the timing. If the promotion came through before his retirement ceremony, I would attend as General Mitchell. The thought brought a complicated mix of emotions, vindication, anxiety, and a small, persistent hope that this, finally, might make him see me. Think about it, Diana said, heading for the door. Sometimes the best revenge isn't cutting people off. It's succeeding so undeniably that they're forced to acknowledge you. As the date of my father's retirement ceremony approached, I still hadn't received an official invitation. My mother's calls became vaguer, with no mention of tickets or details. When I directly asked about the invitation, she became flustered. Oh, I'm sure Kal has handled that. He's helping organize everything. You know how your father is about these things. Wants everything just so. I did know, and a sinking feeling told me exactly what everything just so meant in this context. 3 weeks before my father's retirement gala, I still hadn't received an invitation. My calls to my mother went unanswered, then returned days later with vague excuses about being so busy with preparations. My texts to Kyle received brief, non-committal responses. Are you sure I'm on the guest list? I finally asked him directly. The three disappeared, appeared again. Finally, talked to Mom about that. That was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't invited. I told myself it didn't matter. I had expected nothing less from my father. And yet, the exclusion stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. After all these years, after everything I had accomplished, I was still the daughter he wished didn't exist. The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. My assistant, Jessica, appeared in my office doorway with a confused expression. Colonel, I just received an odd email. It's an invitation to your father's retirement ceremony, but it's addressed to me, not you. Let me see that. I took the tablet from her, scanning the formal invitation. Sure enough, it was addressed to Captain Jessica Lawson and guest with a note that read, As a colleague of Colonel Richard Mitchell, your presence is requested. Jessica had never met my father. She had no connection to him except through me. The invitation had clearly been intended for me but diverted to my assistant instead, either through incompetence or deliberate manipulation. Interesting, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger bubbling inside me. Please decline with my regrets. Of course, ma'am. Would you like me to mention the addressing error? No need. I think the message is quite clear. After Jessica left, I sat staring at the wall, a familiar cocktail of hurt and anger coursing through me. Just once, I wanted my father to acknowledge me, to see me as worthy of the Mitchell name he so revered. Just once, I wanted to be invited to the table rather than having to kick down the door. The phone on my desk rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was General Thomas, my commanding officer. Mitchell, good news. Your promotion's been approved. The official ceremony won't be for a few weeks, but I wanted you to be the first to know. Congratulations, General. I thanked him automatically, my mind still processing the dual impact of my father's rejection and this career milestone. One more thing, General Thomas continued. I understand your father's retirement ceremony is coming up. I received an invitation myself, but can't attend. Would you be representing the family? I actually wasn't invited, sir. A pause. I find that hard to believe, Mitchell. You're one of our most decorated officers, and his daughter. Family dynamics can be complicated, sir. Another pause. Indeed. Well, congratulations again on the promotion. The paperwork should be finalized by next week. Next week. 1 week before my father's ceremony. I would officially outrank him at his own retirement gala, if I were there. That evening, Diana came over with a bottle of whiskey to celebrate my promotion news. After 2 glasses, I confided about the invitation situation. So let me get this straight, she said, leaning forward in my living room chair. Your father is having this big military send-off. You, a newly minted general and his daughter, aren't invited. But your assistant received an invitation by mistake. That about sums it up. Diana shook her head. That's beyond petty. That's psychological warfare. Welcome to the Mitchell family dynamics. I poured another finger of whiskey. The funny thing is, I still want to go. Isn't that pathetic? After everything, I still want him to see me. It's not pathetic. It's human. Diana swirled her drink thoughtfully. So go. I wasn't invited. Since when has that stopped you? You've built your career on going places women weren't invited to be. She leaned forward. Show up. In full dress uniform. With your new general star. Don't let them erase you from your own family history. I considered her suggestion as we finished the bottle. By midnight, a plan had formed. I wouldn't crash the party out of spite or for dramatic effect. I would attend as what I was, a distinguished military officer paying respect to a retiring colleague who happened to be my father. Professional, dignified, and impossible to ignore. The next day, I called Kyle directly, determined to get answers. Why wasn't I invited to Dad's ceremony? I asked without preamble when he answered. A long sigh. Sam, you know why. I want to hear you say it. Dad wants this to be about him, not you. He's worried you'll overshadow him, especially with your promotion coming up. So he knew about my promotion. Information traveled fast in military circles. He's been telling everyone you're too busy with your career to attend, Kyle continued. That you send your regrets. The calculated nature of the lie made my blood boil. And you went along with this? What was I supposed to do, Sam?
You know how he gets.
You could have stood up for me. For once. Like you stood up for me when I wanted to leave the military? When I told you I was miserable and you said I needed to push through it because quitting would devastate Dad. His words hit like a physical blow. That was different. You were going through a rough patch. It's been a 10-year rough patch, Sam. Not everyone wants the military life. Not everyone is you. The conversation left me unsettled. Had I become so focused on proving myself to my father that I'd missed my brother's unhappiness? Had I, in my own way, perpetuated the very family dynamics I resented? The week before the ceremony, I received official confirmation of my promotion to Brigadier General. The formal ceremony would come later, but effective immediately, I had earned my first star. My father's retirement gala was scheduled for Saturday evening. By Friday, I still hadn't decided whether to attend. What finally made up my mind was a message from an old family friend, Colonel James Warwick, who had known my grandfather. Samantha, I was surprised to hear you wouldn't be at Richard's ceremony. Your grandfather would have wanted the whole family there to honor the Mitchell military tradition. I hope you can reconsider. The mention of my grandfather settled it. I would go. Not for my father, but for the Mitchell legacy that included me, whether my father acknowledged it or not. Saturday evening found me standing before my closet, staring at my dress uniform. The new general's star gleamed on the shoulder boards. I dressed with care, affixing each medal and commendation precisely. The woman in the mirror looked confident, accomplished. A general. A Mitchell. My hands trembled slightly as I pinned my grandfather's unit insignia to my uniform, the one personal touch in an otherwise regulation appearance. "This one's for you, Grandpa," I whispered. I arrived at the officers' club precisely on time, neither early enough to seem eager nor late enough to make a scene. The parking lot was full of cars with military decals, and uniformed officers streamed toward the entrance. I took a deep breath and joined them, head high. At the door, a young sergeant checked names against a guest list. When I reached him, I smiled politely. General Samantha Mitchell. He scanned his list then again, more slowly.
"I'm sorry, ma'am."
"I don't see your name here." Despite expecting this exact scenario, the public rejection stung. Several officers behind me shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the awkwardness of the situation. "There must be some mistake," I said, maintaining my composure. "Colonel Richard Mitchell is my father." The sergeant looked genuinely distressed. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I can only admit those on the approved list." As I stood there, caught between pride and humiliation, a familiar voice called out. "Is there a problem here?" Commander Wallace, my father's longtime colleague, approached with a questioning look. When he spotted me, his eyes widened in recognition, then traveled to the star on my shoulder. "General Mitchell, I didn't realize you'd received your promotion already. Congratulations." He turned to the flustered sergeant. "There's clearly been an administrative error. General Mitchell is Colonel Mitchell's daughter." The sergeant looked even more uncomfortable. "Sir, I have specific instructions about the guest list." Commander Wallace waved away his concerns. "I'll take responsibility. Come, General, your father will be delighted you made it." As we walked into the gala, his words hung in the air between us, both of us knowing they couldn't be further from the truth. The officers' club ballroom was transformed for the occasion. Military flags and insignia decorated the walls, and round tables adorned with navy and gold centerpieces filled the space. A stage at the front featured a podium flanked by the American flag and the branch service flag. A large screen displayed a photo montage of my father's military career, images spanning decades, all carefully curated to tell the story of Colonel Richard Mitchell, military hero. I noticed immediately that none of the photos included me. Commander Wallace led me through the crowd, oblivious to the tension. "I can't believe they left you off the list. Must have been a clerical error." "Must have been," I agreed neutrally. As we moved through the room, heads turned. Whispers followed in our wake. I caught fragments. "Mitchell's daughter?" A general now. Didn't know she was coming. My mother spotted me first. She was standing near the bar in a blue evening dress, talking with the wife of one of my father's colleagues. When she saw me, the champagne glass in her hand tilted dangerously. I watched the color drain from her face, then return in a flush of embarrassment. She excused herself and hurried over, a brittle smile fixed in place. "Samantha, what a surprise." "Hello, Mother. I hope you don't mind that I came to support Dad on his big day." Her eyes darted nervously to my shoulder boards, registering the general's star. "Of course not, dear. It's just, we thought you were too busy. Your father will be surprised." "I'm sure he will." Commander Wallace, still beside me, beamed obliviously. "And what a night for it, Eleanor. Did you know Samantha's been promoted? You must be bursting with pride. 2 decorated Mitchells in one family." My mother's smile became even more strained. "Yes, we're very proud. If you'll excuse me, I should let Richard know you're here, Samantha." As she hurried away, Commander Wallace turned to me. "Let me introduce you to some people while we wait. There are several officers here who would be honored to meet you." For the next 20 minutes, I was escorted around the room, introduced as General Mitchell, one of our youngest female generals and Colonel Mitchell's daughter. Each introduction brought surprised looks, enthusiastic handshakes, and inevitable questions about my father's reaction to my success. "He must be your biggest champion," said one lieutenant colonel's wife. "The Mitchell military excellence clearly runs in the family," commented a retired general. I responded with diplomatic non-answers, painfully aware that my mother still hadn't returned with my father. Finally, I spotted Kyle across the room, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod and made his way over. "Sam," he said quietly, "I didn't know you were coming." "Apparently no one did," I replied. "Where's Dad?" Kyle glanced toward a side door. "Mom's talking to him. He's processing the situation." "You mean he's furious that I showed up uninvited?" "Something like that." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Sam," before he could continue, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly, and the base commander approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes." Kyle touched my arm. "You should sit at the family table. Whatever Dad says, you belong there." I followed him to the front of the room, where a table was reserved with "Mitchell family" on a small placard. My mother was already seated, looking tense. The chair beside her, my father's chair, remained empty. As I took my seat, whispers rippled through the nearby tables. I sat straight-backed in my chair, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. After all these years, all these achievements, I still felt like that 16-year-old girl being told that Mitchell women don't serve. The base commander, General Robert Simmons, took the stage. "Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are gathered here tonight to honor the illustrious military career of Colonel Richard Mitchell, who has served our country with distinction for 35 years. As he continued with opening remarks, the side door opened, and my father finally entered. He looked distinguished in his dress uniform, chest decorated with medals, silver hair perfectly trimmed. His eyes scanned the room, acknowledging nods and salutes, before landing on our table. When he saw me, his step faltered almost imperceptibly. For a moment, I thought he might turn around and walk out. Instead, he composed his features into a neutral expression and continued to the table. He took his seat beside my mother without acknowledging me. "You look well, Samantha," he said stiffly, eyes forward. "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad." He nodded curtly, then leaned over to whisper something to my mother, who shot me an apologetic glance. On stage, General Simmons was recounting highlights of my father's career. "Colonel Mitchell has exemplified leadership throughout his career, from his early days as a young lieutenant to his current role overseeing strategic operations." As the speech continued, various colleagues were invited to share brief anecdotes about working with my father. Each speaker praised his dedication, his strategic mind, his commitment to excellence. Several mentioned the Mitchell military tradition and how proud his family must be. Commander Wallace took the podium next. "I've had the privilege of serving alongside Richard Mitchell for over 20 years. The Mitchell name has become synonymous with military excellence, a tradition that continues to this day." His eyes found me in the audience, and a smile spread across his face. "In fact, we're honored to have Colonel Mitchell's daughter with us tonight. Many of you may not know that Samantha Mitchell has just been promoted to Brigadier General, one of the youngest women to achieve that rank. The Mitchell legacy is clearly in good hands." A murmur ran through the crowd. All eyes turned toward me. My father sat rigidly beside me, his jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear his teeth grinding. Commander Wallace continued, oblivious to the tension. "I remember Richard telling me years ago that military service was in the Mitchell blood." Looking at General Mitchell tonight, I'd say he was absolutely right. "Would you stand for a moment, General, so everyone can congratulate you?" Before I could decide how to respond, my father abruptly stood instead. "Thank you, David, but tonight isn't about my daughter's career. If we could return to the program." The awkwardness was palpable. Commander Wallace looked confused, then embarrassed. "Of course, Richard. I just thought." "Well, It's not every day a father and daughter both achieve such military distinction. My father remained standing, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative. My retirement marks the end of my branch of the Mitchell military service. My son, Captain Kyle Mitchell, will be pursuing a different path, with my full support. This was news to me. I glanced at Kyle, who looked both surprised and relieved at this public acknowledgement of a decision that must have been recently made. As my father continued speaking, effectively hijacking his own retirement ceremony to prevent any further mention of my achievements, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This pettiness, this determined erasure of my existence, this was what I had been seeking approval from all these years. When my father finally sat down, General Simmons looked uncomfortable but recovered quickly. And now, we have a special presentation to make to Colonel Mitchell. What happened next was unplanned, but somehow inevitable. As General Simmons announced that my father would receive a Distinguished Service Medal, he added, "And we'd like to invite Colonel Mitchell's family to join him on stage for the presentation." My mother immediately stood. Kyle followed. All eyes turned to me. For a moment, I considered remaining seated, refusing to participate in this charade of family unity. But some deeper instinct propelled me to my feet. I was a Mitchell, whether my father acknowledged it or not. I belonged on that stage as much as any of them. As we walked to the stage, the crowd applauded. I could feel my father's tension radiating from him as I took my place beside Kyle. General Simmons presented the medal, shook my father's hand, and then turned to include all of us in a group photo. The Mitchell family, the photographer directed. "Colonel, if you could stand in the center with Mrs. Mitchell and Captain and General Mitchell on either side." The flash captured a moment of supreme irony, my father, frozen in a smile that didn't reach his eyes, my mother, looking anxious, Kyle, uncomfortable, and me, standing tall in my general's uniform, outranking the man who had tried to keep me from serving at all. As we returned to our seats, Commander Wallace intercepted me. "General Mitchell, I didn't realize there was any sensitivity about mentioning your promotion. I hope I didn't cause any discomfort." "Not at all, Commander. Family dynamics can be complicated." "Indeed." He hesitated. "I should mention your father tried to have your promotion delayed, you know. Made some calls suggesting you weren't ready for the responsibility." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but it still felt like a punch to the stomach. "He did what?" "It didn't work, obviously. Too many people vouching for your qualifications. But I thought you should know." As Commander Wallace walked away, I processed this new betrayal. My father hadn't just excluded me from a ceremony. He had actively tried to sabotage my career again, just as he had when I first applied to the academy. Some wounds, it seemed, never healed. They just waited beneath the surface, ready to reopen at the slightest touch. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Speeches were made, toasts were offered. My father's career was celebrated in meticulous detail. Throughout it all, I sat at the family table, a visible reminder of the Mitchell legacy my father couldn't entirely control. As dinner was served, the tension at our table was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother made stilted attempts at conversation. Kyle looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. My father focused on acknowledging well-wishers who approached the table, introducing my mother and Kyle but conspicuously omitting me from these exchanges. I sipped my water and observed the dynamics at play, seeing them with new clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a man so invested in his own narrative that he couldn't bear any competition, even from his own daughter. If you've ever had to sit through a family event where your achievements were deliberately ignored, you know that unique mix of hurt and rage that bubbles just below the surface. I wanted to stand up and walk out, but something kept me in that chair. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the last remnant of hope that my father would finally acknowledge me. Or maybe it was the knowledge that my mere presence was forcing everyone to confront the reality he had tried so hard to erase. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of driving me away. Not again. The dinner portion of the evening concluded, and guests began to mingle again as servers cleared the tables. My father excused himself to speak with some former colleagues, visibly relieved to escape the family table. My mother watched him go, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Samantha, perhaps we could speak privately for a moment?" I nodded and followed her to a quiet corner near the coat check. She fidgeted with her clutched purse, avoiding my eyes. "I wish you had told us you were coming," she began. "Would it have changed anything? Would my name have mysteriously appeared on the guest list?" She sighed. "Your father has his ways of seeing things. You know that. What I know is that my own family deliberately excluded me from a significant event, then lied about it. What I know is that my father tried to interfere with my promotion, just like he tried to sabotage my application to the academy." My mother's head snapped up.
Who told you that?
"About the academy? I overheard you and Dad talking about it years ago. About the promotion? Commander Wallace just informed me." She seemed to deflate slightly. "Your father was only trying to protect you." "From what, Mom? Success? Recognition? Being seen as something other than an embarrassment to the mighty Mitchell name?" "That's not fair, Samantha. None of this is fair." I kept my voice low but intense. "I have served my country with honor for 15 years. I have earned every rank, every commendation. And still, my own father can't bear to acknowledge me because what? Because I'm a woman? Because I succeeded where he wanted me to fail." My mother glanced around nervously, but we were relatively isolated. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly that simple." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, I saw something I'd rarely witnessed in Eleanor Mitchell: resolve. "Your father didn't just want a son to carry on the Mitchell military tradition," she said quietly. "He needed one." "What are you talking about?" "I had dreams too, Samantha. Before I met your father, I was in college studying military history. I wanted to serve. My father had been in the Navy, and I thought maybe I could be one of the first women to really make a mark." This was news to me. In all our years together, my mother had never mentioned any military aspirations of her own. "What happened?"
I met Richard.
"He was so handsome in his uniform, so confident. When he talked about the Mitchell military legacy, it sounded like something special, something I wanted to be part of." She smiled sadly. "But when I mentioned my own interest in serving, he laughed. Said Mitchell men serve, Mitchell women support. I was young and in love, so I convinced myself that supporting him was enough." I studied my mother's face, seeing it as if for the first time. The lines around her eyes spoke of years of compromise, of dreams deferred, of a life lived in someone else's shadow. "When you came along," she continued, "and started showing interest in military things, it terrified him. He saw in you what he'd suppressed in me, but stronger, more determined. He couldn't control it, so he tried to ignore it. That doesn't excuse what he did." "No, it doesn't. But maybe it helps you understand." She touched my arm lightly. "I should have stood up for you more."
I see that now.
I was so used to deferring to him that I forgot how to have my own voice. Our conversation was interrupted by Kyle, who approached with a nervous expression. "Everything okay here?" "Fine," I replied. "Mom was just sharing some family history." Kyle glanced between us. "Well, Dad's looking for Mom. The base commander wants another photo." As our mother hurried away, Kyle lingered. "Sam, there's something you should know. I'm leaving the military. Dad mentioned that in his speech." I was surprised. I've wanted out for years. I'm only staying through his retirement so he can have this moment. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. "I never wanted this life, Sam. This was his dream, not mine. Why didn't you tell me how unhappy you were?" "I tried, remember? But you were so focused on proving yourself that you couldn't see I was drowning. You told me to tough it out, that it would get better." I winced, remembering the conversation he referenced. "I'm sorry, Kyle. I was wrong." "It's okay. We were both caught in his web, just in different ways. You fighting to be seen, me fighting to disappear." He smiled ruefully. "The funny thing is, I always admired you for standing up to him. I wish I'd had your courage." As Kyle and I talked, I noticed a commotion near the bar. Commander Wallace was speaking animatedly with several other officers, occasionally glancing in my direction. One of them, Colonel Jenkins, broke away from the group and approached us. "General Mitchell, a word?" I excused myself from Kyle and followed Jenkins to a quieter spot. "I feel I should inform you of a concerning conversation," he began. "Commander Wallace mentioned your father tried to interfere with your promotion. That aligns with some other incidents I've been aware of." "What incidents?" Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "Several years ago, you were recommended for the Strategic Operations Task Force, but your name was mysteriously removed from consideration. Your father was on the selection committee."
This was news to me.
The Strategic Operations Task Force was an elite group that would have significantly advanced my career. "There's more," Jenkins continued. "That operation in Kandahar that received such praise? Your strategic framework was initially presented by your father at a closed-door meeting as his own work. It was only when General Adams recognized the approach from your previous papers that the record was corrected." I felt a cold anger spreading through me. These weren't just petty familial slights. These were deliberate attempts to undermine my professional standing, to erase my contributions while simultaneously preventing my advancement. "How many people know about this?" I asked. "More than your father would be comfortable with," Jenkins replied. "Military circles are smaller than they appear, General. People notice patterns." As Jenkins walked away, I stood rooted to the spot, processing this new information. My father hadn't just failed to support me, he had actively worked against me throughout my career. Across the room, I caught sight of my father holding court with a group of retired officers. He was smiling, gesturing expansively, the picture of military confidence. How many of those men knew what he had done? How many had been complicit in his attempts to sabotage my career? My thoughts were interrupted by an elderly woman who approached with a warm smile. "You must be Samantha. I'd know those Mitchell eyes anywhere." "Yes, I am.
I'm Agnes Pearson.
I served with your grandfather in an administrative capacity many years ago." She studied my uniform appreciatively. "He would have been so proud to see you as a general. He always said the Mitchell women were the strong ones." "Did he? My father seems to have a different view." Agnes chuckled. "Joseph and Richard had very different ideas about many things, dear. Did you know your great-aunt Lillian served as a nurse in World War II? Received a Bronze Star for bravery under fire. And your grandmother's cousin Elizabeth was one of the first female codebreakers. The Mitchell women have always served, just not always in ways the men chose to recognize." As we talked, more guests approached, drawn perhaps by my rank or by curiosity about the daughter Colonel Mitchell never mentioned. To my surprise, many of them knew of my service record. Several had worked with me directly, or knew colleagues who had. They spoke warmly of my contributions, my leadership, my strategic innovations. "Your analysis of regional insurgency patterns changed our entire approach," said one major. "The training protocol you developed saved lives in my unit," said another. With each conversation, the narrative my father had tried to establish, that I was an anomaly, an embarrassment to the Mitchell name, crumbled further. Far from being invisible, I had made an impact that rippled throughout the military community. People knew my work, respected it, built upon it. As the evening progressed, I noticed my mother engaged in intense conversation with several military wives. From their gestures and occasional glances in my direction, I suspected she was finally sharing her own truth, perhaps inspired by our earlier conversation. Khalid found his way to a group of younger officers and appeared more relaxed than I'd seen him all evening. When our eyes met across the room, he gave me a small smile and a thumbs up. Even my father couldn't entirely maintain his facade as the night wore on. I overheard snippets of conversation where colleagues innocently mentioned working with me, praising my contributions to projects my father had claimed as his own domain. With each such interaction, his responses became more clipped, his smile more forced. The turning point came when Commander Wallace, perhaps seeking to repair his earlier faux pas, called for everyone's attention. Before we conclude this wonderful evening honoring Colonel Mitchell, I'd like to acknowledge another milestone. We're fortunate to have with us tonight Brigadier General Samantha Mitchell, whose promotion marks her as one of our youngest female generals. The Mitchell tradition of excellence clearly continues into the next generation. Applause broke out around the room. My father, trapped by social convention, had no choice but to acknowledge the toast with a tight smile. As the applause died down, Commander Wallace continued. In fact, I've just learned from General Thomas that Samantha has been appointed to oversee the new Veterans Support Initiative, a program that will directly impact the services available to all our retiring personnel. This was news to me. I hadn't yet been briefed on my first assignment as general, but if Commander Wallace was correct, I would be in charge of funding and resources that would directly affect retired military personnel, including my father. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all my father, whose face had gone from flushed to ashen in the space of Wallace's announcement. As the formal portion of the evening concluded and guests began to depart, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues interested in connecting or reconnecting. Many handed me business cards, mentioned projects they hoped I might consider in my new role, or simply wanted to congratulate me. Through it all, my father remained distant, engaged in conversation with increasingly smaller groups of loyalists. The carefully orchestrated evening meant to celebrate his legacy had become, inadvertently, a revelation of mine. As I gathered my things to leave, Agnes Pearson approached me once more, this time with a small envelope. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this if you ever made general," she said. "He was quite confident you would, even when others weren't." I accepted the envelope with surprise. "You've had this all these years." She nodded. "Joseph was a man who played the long game, dear. Much like you." Inside the envelope was a faded photograph of my grandfather standing beside a young woman in a military nurse's uniform. On the back, in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, was written, "My sister Lillian, the bravest Mitchell I ever knew. Some traditions are meant to be broken so better ones can begin." Along with the photo was a note addressed to me. "Sammy, if you're reading this, you've proven what I always knew, that Mitchell excellence isn't about gender, it's about character. Your father may never understand this, but I hope someday he'll recognize what I see so clearly. You are the best of us. Wear the star with pride. Love, Grandpa." I carefully tucked the envelope into my uniform pocket, a tangible connection to the family legacy my father had tried to deny me. In that moment, I realized I had never needed his approval. I had already received the blessing that mattered most. In the days following my father's retirement gala, I found myself at a crossroads. The revelations of that night, my father's systematic attempts to undermine my career, my mother's sacrificed dreams, my brother's years of unhappiness in a role he never wanted, left me with a decision to make. I could cut ties completely with my family, pursue formal complaints against my father for his interference with my career, or attempt some form of reconciliation. None of these options felt entirely right. I spent a weekend alone at my apartment, spreading out the documentation I had accumulated over the years. Performance reviews my father had tried to influence, recommendations that had mysteriously disappeared, projects where my contributions had been minimized or credited to others. When laid out chronologically, the pattern was unmistakable and damning. If I wanted to, I could file a formal ethics complaint. With the evidence I had and the witnesses who had approached me at the gala, I could potentially affect my father's retirement benefits, his legacy, even his pension. The military took such ethics violations seriously, especially when they involved nepotism and dishonesty. The power of this realization was both satisfying and disturbing. After years of feeling powerless against my father's manipulation, I now held his reputation in my hands. But what would destroying him accomplish? Would it heal the wounds of the past? Would it make me feel whole? Or would it simply perpetuate the cycle of hurt that had defined our relationship for so long? I needed perspective, so I called Diana. "If you filed a complaint, you'd win," she said bluntly after I laid out the situation. "But victory and peace aren't the same thing, Sam. You need to decide what you actually want here. What I want is for him to acknowledge what he did, to admit he was wrong. And if he never does? That was the question, wasn't it? What if Richard Mitchell went to his grave, never acknowledging the ways he had tried to diminish me? Could I find peace without his confession? Before I could answer that question for myself, I needed more information. My mother had begun to open up at the gala, but there was clearly more to the story. I invited her to lunch at a quiet restaurant near my apartment, away from my father's influence. She arrived looking both nervous and determined, a combination I wasn't used to seeing in Eleanor Mitchell. After we ordered, I broached the subject directly. I need to understand, Mom. Not just what Dad did, but why you let it happen. She fiddled with her napkin. I've been asking myself the same question since the gala. The truth is, I lost myself in your father's narrative years ago. I became the person he needed me to be. The supportive military wife, the mother who raised children according to his expectations. But you had your own dreams once. Yes. A small smile. I wanted to study military strategy, maybe work in intelligence. When I met your father, I thought I could still pursue those interests, just in a different way. But Richard was very traditional in his views. Did you ever stand up to him? About anything? Her eyes met mine.
Once.
When you were applying to the academy the second time, after your grandfather got involved. Richard was furious, said he would call in every favor he had to block you again. I told him if he did, I would leave him. This was startling. I had never imagined my mother making such a stand. What happened? He didn't believe me at first. Then he realized I was serious. He didn't make the calls, but he found other ways to express his disapproval, as you know. Why didn't you tell me this before? I was ashamed, Samantha. Ashamed that the only time I found my courage was when it was almost too late. Ashamed that I hadn't supported you from the beginning. She reached across the table to touch my hand. I failed you. I see that now. There was genuine remorse in her eyes, and something else, a glimmer of the woman she might have been if she hadn't surrendered her identity to my father's demands. What about Kyle? I asked. Did you know he was unhappy in the military? I suspected. But your father was so set on having a son follow in his footsteps that I convinced myself Kyle would adjust eventually. She sighed. Another failure on my part. As we talked, I began to see my mother not just as a passive participant in my father's narrative, but as someone who had made difficult choices based on the constraints of her generation and circumstances. It didn't excuse her complicity, but it helped me understand it. What happens now? She asked as our lunch concluded. With your father, I mean. I'm still deciding. I have enough evidence to file an ethics complaint about his interference with my career. Her face paled. That would destroy him, Samantha. I know. That's why I haven't decided yet. My next conversation was with Kyle, who met me for a run in the park the following day. As we jogged along the familiar path, I filled him in on my lunch with our mother. She's changing, Kyle observed. Standing up to Dad more. Yesterday, she told him she's going back to school to finish her degree. Good for her. What about you? What are your plans after you leave the service? I've applied to teaching programs. I want to work with kids, maybe coach basketball. He smiled. Dad nearly had a stroke when I told him. Are you staying with him and Mom?
For now.
Moving out next month. I need to establish some boundaries if we're going to have any kind of relationship going forward. He glanced at me. What about you? Mom mentioned you might file a complaint. I'm considering it. Kyle was quiet for a moment as we continued running. He's not all bad, you know. Just broken in a specific way. His father was 10 times worse than he ever was to us. That doesn't excuse what he did, Kyle. No, it doesn't. But understanding helps. He slowed to a walk, and I matched his pace. Look, whatever you decide, I'll support you. But ask yourself if punishing him will heal what's broken in you. His words stayed with me as I drove to Arlington National Cemetery later that day. My grandfather was buried there, and I hadn't visited his grave since before my deployment. It seemed fitting to go now, as I wrestled with decisions about family legacy and personal integrity. I stood before his headstone, polished and dignified like the man himself. General Joseph Mitchell. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. Defender of freedom. I made General, Grandpa, I said quietly, just like you said I would. As I placed flowers on his grave, a groundskeeper approached. General Mitchell, he asked, noting my uniform. Yes. I have something for you. Been holding it a while. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a weathered envelope. Your grandfather left this with the cemetery office years ago, with instructions to give it to you when you visited as a general. Most unusual request, but he was quite insistent. I accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my grandfather's handwriting. Sammy, if you're reading this, you've proven what I always knew you could do. The path hasn't been easy. Mitchell women have always had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. But true strength isn't in winning every battle, it's in choosing which battles define you. Your father is a product of his time and his father's influence. I tried to break the cycle with him, but old habits run deep. Now the choice is yours. Perpetuate the pattern of hurt, or transcend it. Whatever you decide, remember this. Revenge shatters, justice heals, forgiveness liberates, but only you can determine what true justice means in this case. I'm proud of you, General Mitchell. Lead with wisdom and compassion, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. With love and faith in you, Grandpa. I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in my pocket next to the photograph Agnes had given me. My grandfather, it seemed, had anticipated this moment of decision long before I reached it. That evening, I received a call from General Thomas regarding my new assignment overseeing the Veterans Support Initiative. It's a significant responsibility, Mitchell, he said. You'll be determining funding allocations for veteran services, including healthcare, housing assistance, and pension support. I understand, sir. One thing you should be aware of, your father will fall under the purview of this program. He paused. If that presents a conflict of interest, we can reassign you. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of my father having power over my career, I would now have indirect influence over his retirement benefits. No conflict, sir. I can separate personal and professional matters.
Good.
Because we need someone with both compassion and backbone for this role. Too many veterans fall through the cracks because of bureaucracy and budget constraints. Your job will be to fix that, regardless of whose toes get stepped on. After the call, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence I'd gathered against my father. I had 3 options before me: file the ethics complaint and potentially destroy his reputation and benefits. Do nothing and allow him to enjoy his retirement untouched by consequences, or find a middle path that acknowledged the harm done without perpetuating it. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Revenge shatters, justice heals, forgiveness liberates. What would justice look like in this situation? Not punishment for its own sake, but accountability that might lead to growth and repair? I began to draft a letter, not to the ethics board, but to my father. I detailed each instance where he had interfered with my career, providing dates, names, and specific actions. I described the impact these actions had on me personally and professionally. I explained how his behavior had damaged not just our relationship, but Kyle's life path and my mother's sense of self. I concluded with a proposition. I would not file a formal complaint, but in exchange, I expected 3 things. First, a written acknowledgement of his actions. Second, his support for Kyle's decision to leave the military. And third, a genuine attempt to repair our family relationships through counseling. If he refused, I would reconsider my decision about the ethics complaint. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even perfect justice. But it was a path forward that allowed for accountability while leaving room for healing. I sealed the letter, but didn't send it immediately. First, I had another important visit to make. Kyle had mentioned that our father had been visiting the VFW hall regularly since his retirement, connecting with other veterans and sharing war stories. I found him there the next afternoon, sitting with a group of retired military men around a table strewn with coffee cups. He saw me the moment I entered, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. I approached the table in civilian clothes, determined that this conversation would be between father and daughter, not between military ranks. Dad, I said, could we speak privately? After a moment's hesitation, he excused himself from his companions and led me to a quiet corner of the hall. What can I do for you, Samantha? I've been appointed to oversee the Veteran Support Initiative, I said without preamble. I'll be determining funding allocations for veteran services, including benefits that will affect you directly. His face hardened. Are you here to threaten me?
No.
I'm here to be transparent. My personal feelings about our relationship won't affect how I perform my duties. Every veteran, including you, deserves proper support and benefits. He studied me, clearly trying to determine if there was a hidden meaning behind my words. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that regardless of what happened between us, I won't abuse my position. That's not who I am. I paused. It's not who a Mitchell should be. For the first time in our difficult relationship, I saw something like respect flicker in his eyes. Is that all?
No.
I handed him the sealed letter. This details every instance where you interfered with my career, along with my terms for not filing a formal ethics complaint. Read it carefully. We can discuss it when you're ready. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Samantha. I looked back. The promotion. You earned it. I should have said that at the ceremony. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a full acknowledgement of what he'd done. But it was more than he'd ever conceded before. Yes, I said simply. I did. In the days that followed, I threw myself into preparations for my new role. I reviewed budgets, studied existing veterans programs, and met with key stakeholders. I was determined that my first major assignment as general would be executed flawlessly, benefiting as many veterans as possible, including my father. A week after our encounter at the VFW hall, Kyle called to tell me our father wanted to meet. He's been different since you gave him that letter, Kyle said. Quieter. More thoughtful. Mom says he's actually considering family counseling. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a park bench overlooking the river where our grandfather had once taught us to fish. I arrived first and watched as my father approached, looking older and more uncertain than I had ever seen him. He sat beside me, and for a long moment, we both stared at the water. I read your letter, he finally said. Several times. And you're right. About all of it. He turned to face me directly. I was wrong, Samantha. I was wrong to try to keep you out of the military. I was wrong to interfere with your career. I was wrong to push Kyle into a life he didn't want. The admission, so long awaited, felt both momentous and somehow insufficient. Why did you do it? He looked back at the river. Fear, mostly. Fear that you would succeed where I had plateaued. Fear that the Mitchell name would become associated with a woman's achievements rather than a man's. Fear that everything I had built my identity around was changing too fast. He sighed heavily. None of that excuses what I did, but it might explain it.
What about Mom?
Did you know she wanted to serve? Not at first. By the time I understood her interest was genuine, we were already married, and I couldn't imagine a military wife with her own career. It wasn't done in those days. He shook his head. Another failure on my part. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of decades of misunderstanding and hurt suspended between us. Your terms, he said eventually. I accept them all. I'll put my acknowledgement in writing. I'll support Kyle's decision. And I'll attend counseling, though I can't promise I'll be good at it. That's all I ask. That you try. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I was going to give this to Kyle when he made major, but I think it belongs with you. Inside the box was a silver compass, worn with age, but still beautiful. It was your great-grandfather's, my father explained. The first Mitchell to serve. Legend has it this compass guided him home from behind enemy lines in World War I. Dad, I can't, please. It should go to the Mitchell, who will take the family legacy furthest. His voice broke slightly. That's you, Samantha. It's always been you. The gesture, simple yet profound, represented a shifting of perspective I had never thought possible for my father. It wasn't complete redemption. That would take time and consistent effort, but it was a beginning. As we prepared to leave, my father asked, "What made you decide not to file the complaint?" "You had every right to." I thought about my grandfather's letter, about Diana's question about what victory really meant, about Kyle's observation that understanding helps. "Because destroying you wouldn't heal me," I said simply. "And because I believe in second chances, even for people who didn't give them to me." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're a better Mitchell than I ever was." "No," I corrected him gently. "Just a different kind. Maybe the kind we need now." My promotion ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning 3 weeks later. Unlike most military ceremonies, which tend toward the formal and impersonal, I had worked with my staff to create an event that reflected both the gravity of the occasion and the personal journey that had brought me to this moment. The auditorium at the base was filled with colleagues, friends, and a small section reserved for family. My mother sat in the front row, wearing a proud smile and a new confidence that seemed to have emerged since our conversations following the retirement gala. Beside her was Kyle, looking relaxed in civilian clothes for the first time in years. The seat next to him remained conspicuously empty as the ceremony began. General Thomas presided, recounting my service record with genuine admiration. "Brigadier General Mitchell has demonstrated exceptional leadership, strategic innovation, and unwavering commitment throughout her career," he said. "Her appointment to oversee the Veteran Support Initiative reflects our confidence in her ability to transform how we care for those who have served." As the formal part of the ceremony concluded, and I prepared to give my remarks, a movement at the back of the auditorium caught my attention. My father, in his dress uniform with all his decorations, slipped quietly into the room. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and he gave a small nod before taking the empty seat beside Kyle. His presence was unexpected. In our recent interactions, he had been making small steps toward reconciliation, but I hadn't been sure he would attend today. The fact that he had chosen to come, to publicly acknowledge my achievement, spoke volumes. I approached the podium, surveying the room filled with people who had supported me, challenged me, and helped shape my career. My prepared remarks suddenly seemed inadequate for the moment. "Thank you, General Thomas, for those kind words. And thank you to everyone here today who has been part of this journey." I paused, gathering my thoughts. Military service is often described in terms of individual achievement, medals earned, ranks attained, missions accomplished. But the truth is more complex. I looked directly at my family section. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, both those who cleared the path and those who placed obstacles that forced us to become stronger, more determined. My father's expression remained neutral, but I saw him straighten slightly in his seat. "The Mitchell family has served this country for generations," I continued. "My grandfather once told me that military excellence isn't about gender. It's about character, courage, and commitment. Today, I accept this promotion in honor of all the Mitchells who served, including those whose contributions weren't always recognized." I spoke about my vision for the Veteran Support Initiative, emphasizing the importance of comprehensive care that addressed not just physical wounds, but psychological ones as well. "Sometimes the deepest injuries are the ones we can't see," I said. "Healing requires acknowledgement, accountability, and a commitment to change. That's true for individuals, for families, and for institutions." As I concluded my remarks and stepped away from the podium, the applause was warm and sustained. Diana caught my eye from her seat and gave me a thumbs up. Commander Wallace nodded approvingly. But it was my family's reaction I sought most. My mother's tears of pride, Kyle's enthusiastic applause, and my father's measured but genuine acknowledgement. After the ceremony, a reception was held in an adjacent hall. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and engaging in brief conversations about my new role. Eventually, I made my way to where my family stood. "I'm so proud of you," my mother said, embracing me. "Your grandfather would be too." "Thanks, Mom. And thank you for coming, all of you." Kyle hugged me next. "Congratulations, General Mitchell. Well deserved." My father stood slightly apart, still uncomfortable with the new family dynamics we were slowly establishing. "It was a good ceremony," he said formally. "Your remarks were thoughtful. Thank you for coming, Dad. It means a lot that you're here." He nodded, then seemed to make a decision. "I submitted my letter yesterday, as we discussed. And I've scheduled an appointment with that family counselor you recommended." These were small steps, but significant ones. "I appreciate that." "Your new assignment," he continued, "overseeing veterans' benefits. That's important work." "It is. I'm hoping to make some meaningful improvements. If you ever want input from someone who's now on the receiving end of those benefits, I might have some insights to offer." The offer was tentative, an olive branch extended with uncertainty. "I'd welcome that, actually. Maybe we could discuss it over coffee sometime." A small nod. "I'd like that." Our conversation was interrupted by General Thomas, who needed to introduce me to several dignitaries. As I excused myself, I caught a glimpse of my mother taking my father's hand, a small gesture of support as he navigated this unfamiliar territory of watching his daughter succeed beyond his own achievements. The weeks following my promotion were a whirlwind of activity as I settled into my new role. The Veteran Support Initiative presented complex challenges, from budget constraints to bureaucratic resistance to change. I threw myself into the work, determined to create meaningful improvements in how our nation cared for its veterans. 1 month after taking the position, I scheduled a meeting with my father to discuss his experiences with the current system. We met at a coffee shop near his home, a neutral ground where we could speak as colleagues rather than father and daughter. He arrived with a folder full of notes and observations. "I've been talking with other veterans at the VFW," he explained, "getting their input on what works and what doesn't in the current system." For the next hour, we had the most productive conversation of our adult lives. He pointed out inefficiencies in the healthcare referral process, unnecessary paperwork duplications, and gaps in mental health services. I took notes, asked follow-up questions, and found myself genuinely impressed by his insights.
This is helpful, Dad.
Really helpful. Well, I've been on both sides now, giving orders and taking them. He hesitated. "Your grandfather always said the best officers listen to the people on the ground. Seems you inherited that trait from him." It was the closest he had come to a direct compliment of my military leadership. I accepted it with a nod, not wanting to make too much of this fragile new dynamic between us. "The family counseling starts next week," he said as we were preparing to leave. "Your mother's insisting we all attend the first session. All of us? Including me, if you're willing." His eyes met mine briefly. "I can't change the past, Samantha, but I'd like to try to do better moving forward." I considered his request. The idea of sitting in a therapy room with my father, unpacking decades of hurt and disappointment, was daunting. And yet, wasn't this what I had asked for in my terms? That he make a genuine attempt to repair family relationships? "I'll be there," I promised. That first counseling session was as difficult as I had anticipated. Our therapist, Dr. Evans, had experience working with military families and understood the unique dynamics at play. She guided us through an initial conversation that was stilted at times, raw at others, but ultimately productive. My father struggled to express emotions, falling back on military jargon and deflection when discussions became too personal. My mother vacillated between defense of my father and newfound advocacy for herself. Kyle and I watched this parental dance with the practiced eyes of children who had grown up navigating its steps. "This is going to take time, Dr. Evans cautioned at the end of our session. "Healing family wounds isn't a battle with a clear victory condition. It's more of a long-term peace negotiation." The military metaphor resonated with all of us. We agreed to continue the sessions, both as a family and in various pair combinations. My father and I would meet separately to address our specific issues. Kyle would work with our father on redefining their relationship outside the military context. My mother would have individual sessions to develop her own voice after years of suppressing it. Meanwhile, my work with the Veteran Support Initiative was gaining momentum. I had assembled a strong team, streamlined processes, and secured additional funding for mental health services. The initiatives were making a tangible difference in veterans' lives, including, indirectly, my father's. 3 months after my promotion, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My father's former commander, General Wilson, requested a meeting about the Veterans Program. When he arrived, however, it became clear he had another agenda. "I wanted to tell you something about your father," he said after the pleasantries were concluded. "Something he'd never tell you himself." I waited, curious. "After your second deployment, there was an incident. A strategic error that could have had serious consequences. Your father identified the problem and corrected it before any harm was done, but in doing so, he revealed his own prior knowledge of your deployment location, information he shouldn't have had access to. He was monitoring my deployments." I asked, unsurprised but still disappointed. "Yes, but not for the reasons you might think." General Wilson leaned forward. When questioned, he admitted he'd been keeping tabs on all high-risk deployments where female officers were serving. He'd developed a system for identifying potential trouble spots, security gaps, extraction challenges. "Why would he do that?" he said, and I quote, "Because no one else is looking out for them the way they should be. He was protecting female officers, Samantha. Including you." I sat back, processing this information. That doesn't excuse his interference with my career.
No, it doesn't.
But it suggests his motivations were more complex than simple sexism. He was trying to protect you the only way he knew how, by controlling the situation. Wilson smiled slightly. "Ironically, you've proven that the best protection is excellence, not restriction." After Wilson left, I sat at my desk for a long time, contemplating this new perspective on my father's actions. It didn't erase the harm he had caused, but it added nuance to my understanding of him. Perhaps his attempts to keep me from serving weren't solely about preserving the Mitchell name for male achievements. Perhaps they were also driven by a father's fear for his daughter in a world he knew to be dangerous. Fear, I was learning, could manifest in many ways. It could make a strong man try to control everyone around him. It could make a supportive woman silence her own dreams. It could make a dutiful son follow a path that made him miserable. And it could make an ambitious daughter doubt her own worth when she should have been celebrating her achievements. 6 months after my promotion, I initiated a new program within the Veterans Support Initiative, a mentorship scheme pairing experienced female officers with young women interested in military careers. The program would provide guidance, support, and practical advice to help these women navigate the challenges they would face in what was still, despite progress, a male-dominated institution. For the program's launch event, I invited female officers of all ranks to share their experiences and insights. To my surprise, my mother asked if she could attend. "I never served," she explained when I questioned her interest. "But I might have some perspective to offer about the path not taken." The day of the launch, we had an impressive turnout. Dozens of female officers and enlisted personnel filled the conference room, along with young women from ROTC programs and military schools. My mother sat quietly in the back, observing the proceedings with interest. After the formal presentations, I invited questions from the audience. A young cadet stood and addressed me directly. "General Mitchell, did you always know you wanted to serve? Or was there a specific moment when you decided?" I considered the question, aware of my mother watching from the back of the room. "There wasn't one moment," I answered honestly. "It was more a gradual realization that I belonged in this world, despite messages suggesting otherwise. But I was fortunate to have key supporters at critical junctures, my grandfather, who believed in me, mentors who saw my potential, and friends who reminded me why the struggle was worthwhile." I paused, then added, "I also learned from the women who came before me, both those who serve in uniform and those who supported from other roles. Every woman who challenges limitations creates space for those who follow." My gaze met my mother's, and I saw tears in her eyes. She gave me a small nod of acknowledgement, of gratitude perhaps, for including her in that legacy of influence. After the event, she approached me. "That was wonderful, Samantha. Those young women are lucky to have you, as an example." "Thank you. I'm glad you came." I've been thinking, she said, her voice gaining confidence. Maybe I could contribute something to your mentorship program. Not about serving directly, but about recognizing and pursuing your calling even when others discourage you. About not making the mistakes I made. I think that would be valuable, I replied, genuinely appreciative of her offer. Very valuable. Over the following months, our family continued the difficult work of healing. The counseling sessions remained challenging but increasingly productive. My father, true to his word, acknowledged his past actions and worked to understand their impact. My mother rediscovered her voice and interests. Kyle flourished in his new teaching career, his natural leadership finding expression in the classroom rather than on the battlefield. And I found myself gradually letting go of the anger that had fueled me for so long. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but no longer allowing the past to determine my future. 1 year after my promotion, I hosted a small dinner at my home to mark the anniversary. Diana was there along with several close colleagues. To my surprise, my father asked if he might say a few words. He stood somewhat stiffly, military bearing evident even in retirement. I'm not good at speeches unless they involve battle plans, he began awkwardly. But I wanted to say something about leadership. The table quieted, everyone's attention focused on him. For most of my career, I thought leadership meant having all the answers, making all the decisions, controlling all the variables. He glanced at me. Samantha has shown me a different model. Leadership that listens, that adapts, that acknowledges mistakes and learns from them. He raised his glass. To General Mitchell. Not because she's my daughter, but because she's the kind of leader our military and our family needed. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement from everyone at the table. I caught my mother's eye, saw her proud smile, the quiet satisfaction of witnessing this moment she had once thought impossible. Later that evening, as guests were departing, my father lingered behind. There's something I've been meaning to give you, he said, producing a small, weathered notebook from his pocket. This belonged to your great-aunt Lillian, the nurse who served in World War II. My father gave it to me, but I never really appreciated its significance until recently. I accepted the notebook, leafing carefully through pages filled with observations from field hospitals, notes on treatment innovations, and occasional personal reflections on being a woman in wartime. She saved hundreds of lives, my father continued. Developed a triage system that became standard practice. Trained other nurses under fire. He shook his head. All these years, I had this record of Mitchell excellence sitting in a drawer because it didn't fit my narrow definition of service. Thank you for sharing this with me, I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. I thought maybe you could include it in that historical display you're creating for your mentorship program. Let these young women know they're part of a longer tradition than they might realize. I'd like that. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. I'm proud of you, Samantha. I should have said that a long time ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the officer you've become, and the daughter you've always been. The words I had longed to hear for decades were finally spoken. They didn't erase the past, but they created space for a different future. One where the Mitchell legacy could encompass all forms of service, all expressions of excellence, regardless of gender. 2 years after my promotion to general, I found myself addressing a new class of military academy graduates. As I looked out at their young faces, men and women of diverse backgrounds, all embarking on paths of service, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this podium. Your path forward will not always be clear, I told them. You will face obstacles, some external, some of your own making. You will encounter people who support your dreams and those who doubt your capabilities. Both will shape you. The measure of your success won't be found in the ranks you achieve or the medals you earn, though these are worthy goals. It will be found in your integrity, in your resilience, and in your willingness to create space for others to excel alongside you. The strongest leaders aren't those who demand loyalty. They're those who earn trust. They're not those who never falter. They're those who acknowledge their mistakes and work to repair the damage. They're not those who stand alone at the summit. They're those who reach back to help others climb. After the ceremony, I met with some of the female graduates who had participated in our mentorship program. Among them was a confident young woman named Rachel, whose situation had reminded me of my own. Her father, like mine, had opposed her military ambitions, believing women didn't belong in combat roles. "How are things with your father now?" I asked her. "Better," she replied. "He came to graduation today." "That's a start." "It is," I agreed. "Sometimes that's all you need, a start." As I watched her join her family, saw the tentative pride in her father's expression, I thought about how patterns could be broken, how healing could happen across generations. My own father was different now. Still reserved, still struggling at times to express emotions, but genuinely trying to be better. He volunteered with veteran support groups, mentored young officers transitioning to civilian life, and even occasionally spoke about the importance of supporting women in the military. My mother had completed her degree and now worked part-time at a military history museum, specializing in the often overlooked contributions of women in wartime. She had found her voice and her passion, proving it's never too late to reclaim a dream. Kyle had become an exceptional teacher, his military experience giving him unique insight into the struggles of children from military families. He had recently been nominated for a state teaching award for his innovative approach to supporting these students. And me? I continued to rise through the ranks, my work with the Veteran Support Initiative earning recognition and being adopted as a model nationwide. But more importantly, I had found peace with my past, understanding that the journey, difficult as it had been, had forged me into the leader I had become. The Mitchell military tradition continued, not as a rigid legacy passed only through male heirs, but as a broader commitment to service that could take many forms across generations. My grandfather would have approved. Family relationships are complex, shaped by expectations, traditions, and unspoken rules that often outlive their usefulness. Breaking these patterns requires courage, the courage to confront painful truths, to forgive without forgetting, to create new definitions of family loyalty based on mutual respect rather than blind obedience. If my story resonates with you, perhaps you're navigating your own family drama or struggling to be seen for who you truly are. Remember that true strength sometimes means standing your ground, but it also means knowing when to extend a hand in reconciliation. It means recognizing that people can change, that relationships can heal, that the most meaningful victories often come not from defeating others, but from helping them see a better way forward. As I've learned through my journey from excluded daughter to respected general, sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Not just of yourself, but of the very dynamics that once caused you pain. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family challenges and how you've addressed them. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, consider subscribing to hear more stories of overcoming adversity and finding strength in unexpected places. Your support means everything, and your stories remind me why sharing these difficult truths matters. Remember, sometimes the list you're not on becomes the very credential that defines your greatest achievement. And sometimes, the most meaningful welcome comes when you've already proven you belonged all along. Thank you for listening, for understanding, and for being part of this community of resilience and growth. Until next time, this is General Samantha Mitchell, signing off.